Hello and welcome to BattleTech Faction Briefings. This is the fourth video in the Wolf's Dragoons series. If you need to play catch-up, I highly recommend my BattleTech Faction Briefings playlist. Today, we are looking at a regiment nicknamed the Grey Wolves, who had intense ups and downs in their history. Strap on your cooling vest and get ready, because today we are discussing Wolf's Dragoons Delta Regiment. Like all the Dragoons, they use the same black snarling wolf on a red background as their mercenary emblem. The regimental emblem is a Greek delta. Each battalion has their own symbol. Abel uses crossed halberds against a silhouetted battle mech. Baker uses a jackrabbit wearing a flak vest. Charlie uses a Corinthian helmet as their insignia. Each unit puts their emblems on the right torso and left hip of their battle mech. Delta uses a dust gray paint scheme for their mechs and vehicles. Their elementals use a gray, white, and black camo paint scheme with a wolf's head painted on their masks with gray eyes. Unlike the other units, the off-duty soldiers have their own ball caps with a red delta on them. Like other Dragoon regiments, Delta has a long history. If you want to avoid spoilers, then skip to the time listed. Delta Regiment was part of the original Dragoon force that started in clan space with the mission of reconnaissance of the Inner Sphere. The team arrived in 3005, and shortly after, they took up a contract with House Davian. The first mission for Delta was on Halloran 5 in early 3006. It was a compelling world that was used as a staging area for raids into the Federated Suns. The Dragoons sent Beta, Gamma, and Delta regiments with Zeta Battalion and the 7th Commando to the world, with overall command being ordered by Colonel Jamie Wolfe. Halloran was defended by Mirian's Highlanders and the Blackwind Lancers. The first move was to have Zeta's assault mechs rush in and push the Capellan forces out of their base. The next move was to have Beta, Gamma, and Zeta hit the Highlanders. Meanwhile, Delta moved in to draw away the Blackwind Lancers and prevent them from calling for backup via the HPG. Delta's Colonel King used combined arms tactics, beginning with air raids, then moving into assault and heavy mechs, while using artillery to drive the enemy where King wanted them to go. The next day, the Lancers counterattacked and surprised Delta's light units with a raid and Inferno-equipped infantry. The Delta retort put the Lancers into disarray, with the 7th Commando hitting them from behind. The Blackwind Lancers lost many mechs and lost all their infantry. Then, the Lancers got pushed into the Highlanders, causing chaos within the Liao ranks. The Liao forces retreated, and even when reinforcements arrived, all they could do was evacuate the world. After 5 days of fighting, the Dragoons won their first battle due to Delta's support. In January 3007, they were stationed on New Valencia with Gamma and Epsilon when 5 regiments of McCarran's armored cavalry showed up. Gamma Commander Korst took command and had the Dragoon dependents evacuated before the enemy arrived. Then, the Dragoons took up defensive positions as they endured the siege. The nearby city took heavy damage during the fighting. The Dragoons held the line, despite lesser numbers, but the tide did not turn until 3 regiments of the Iridani Light Horse arrived to support the Dragoons. Realizing that things were going badly, McCarran's armored cavalry reluctantly retreated. The next mission was on New Aragon. The world of New Aragon was guarded by 8 Liao regiments. The Capellans took the world earlier that year, so this was a necessary counterattack. In preparation for the attack, small raiding parties were sent to nearby planets to function as distractions. Members of the Avalon Hussars and Crucis Lancers took on the 1st and 2nd Ariana Fusiliers, Fremont's Cuirassiers, and Trombaldi's Secutors. The 5 regiments of the Wolf's Dragoons were teamed up with the 4th Deneb Light Cavalry and faced off with the 1st and 2nd Kearney Highlanders, McCormick's Fusiliers, and the Waco Rangers. The battle was met with disaster as the 4th Deneb's ship took damage from aerospace fighters and crash-landed, putting their unit out of the battle for a week as they repaired and reorganized. The Dragoons ship was hit hard as well, but they landed and were able to push forward with the attack. The Highlanders were dug in, and the Dragoons hit them with artillery before charging their lines. Despite the punishment, the Highlanders held strong. Delta was sent to break the Highlander lines several times. As the battle continued, Delta Regiment lost their commander, Colonel Travis King, during a retreat where his archer was hit in the rear by an aerospace fighter. The other Davian forces were also having trouble, so Jamie Wolfe came up with a plan. He sent the 7th Commandos with light mechs from Alpha and Gamma regiments to drop behind the defenses of El Diablo Pass. Then Zeta Regiment hit them from the front, and the Waco Rangers took heavy damage, including the death of their recon commander, Lieutenant John Waco, who was accidentally killed by being stepped on after ejecting from his Wasp. The rest of the Dragoons followed Zeta and easily dealt with McCormick's Fusiliers. After that, the Capellan forces were overrun, and the world was won for the Federated Sons. In 3009, the Dragoons returned to Clan Space in order to report their findings, as well as replace and rearm their equipment. When they returned to the Inner Sphere, the Dragoons took up a contract with House Liao. While working with House Liao, Delta, Gamma, and Epsilon were sent out to Wallachia on a defense mission. The Dragoon team went to defend the world from a Free Worlds League offensive. Delta took the lead with mobile defense, distracting multiple enemy regiments. Meanwhile, Gamma and Epsilon worked to strike at the enemy rear lines, destroying their supplies. However, FWLM reinforcements arrived, which caused the Dragoons to give up the world. The team then defended Scarborough. As the planet was attacked by the Fusiliers of Orente, the Dragoons were ready and used similar defense tactics that they had used on Wallachia. However, they were outmaneuvered by the Fusiliers. Delta and Epsilon couldn't get a good position, which exposed Gamma on the Samho Plains. Eventually, Delta and Epsilon were able to break the enemy lines and meet up with Gamma, who were ravaged after escaping an enemy onslaught. The Dragoons fled the world, but the damage they inflicted caused delays in the League offensive. In 3012, the team was moved to Shiro 3 to hold off the Merrick offensive. This would be the final battle of this campaign. The Dragoons were teamed up with several Capellan units to fight back the Merrick forces. Delta built their reputation with skilled hit-and-run attacks, which gave Colonel Wise the nickname The Ghost. After the Free Worlds League offensive was stopped, Delta was set to garrison Carver. A deal was made between Maximilian Liao and Anton Merrick in 3014. This shifted the Dragoons to serve on Anton Merrick's faction of the Merrick Civil War. For the first few months of the war, Delta was held in reserve and was garrisoned on New Delos. In September 3014, Delta was sent to Sophie's World with Epsilon and the 3rd Merrick Militia. The world was defended by the 1st Atrain Dragoons, the 6th Merrick Militia, the Headhunters, and 3 regiments of local militia. The rebel forces overwhelmed the light units, but it was a trap as they were led into an ambush of heavy and assault mechs. The battle took longer than expected, thus Alpha Regiment arrived to support the rebel forces. Alpha landed on the other side of the Atrain Dragoons, trapping them between Alpha and Delta regiments. The Atrain Dragoons were broken, and thus their allies started to flee the world. The remaining members of the 1st Atrain were rounded up and sent off to New Delos prison camps. Delta Regiment only had minimal losses, despite the heavy fighting. In November 3014, Delta was sent to Kienisan, and easily won as there was no enemy defense. Then Delta and Epsilon were sent to protect Emrys 4, to hold off Loyalist counterattacks by the 2nd Fusiliers of Orente. The attackers took heavy losses compared to the minimal losses by Delta. In March 3015, Delta was rotated back to New Delos to meet up with the rest of the Dragoons. The Dragoons were sent to McKenna to disrupt enemy logistics and battled the 1st and 2nd Regulan Hussars. The Hussars took heavy losses and retreated. Their victory was short-lived, as the Dragoons learned that Joshua Wolfe and 27 Dragoon dependents were being held hostage by Anton Merrick. The Dragoons returned to New Delos in time to learn that the hostages had all been executed. Duke Anton was defended by the 18th Merrick Militia with the 1st, 2nd, and 5th Ducal Guards. Delta was to secure the spaceport as the 1st Ducal Guard attempted an evacuation. Those who escaped would be the only members of Anton Merrick's forces to survive the intense days of battle that ended the Civil War. When the smoke was cleared, Delta had taken moderate losses, but were still functional as a unit. After the war ended, the Dragoons took up a contract with the Free Worlds League. This led to a time of recovery and rebuilding for most of the Dragoons. However, Delta was off raiding the Lyran Commonwealth to earn their pay. A notable raid was in 3016, where Beta and Delta were sent to Wyatt. The world was defended by the 11th Lyran Guards and 17th Arcturan Guards. Initially, Delta used hit-and-run maneuvers to deal with their skilled enemies. The Lyran forces used knowledge of the terrain to put the Dragoons on the defense. The Dragoons evacuated, but had difficulty dealing with Lyran aerospace fighters, and lost a dropship as they left. An entire battalion of Beta Regiment was lost. Despite the failure, the FWLM considered it a win because it worked as a distraction while they assaulted 2 other worlds. This tragedy led to the retirement of Colonel Jeremy Ellman, the Beta commander. The biggest operation during the Merrick contract was the assault on Hesperus II. In 3019, the Dragoons took a roundabout route to Hesperus to throw off the LCAF, but a Lyran spy found out about their target. By the time the Dragoons had arrived on Hesperus II, the planet had been reinforced by several Lyran and mercenary forces. The Lyran forces consisted of the 6th, 15th, and 24th Lyran Guards, 3rd Royal Guards, Heathen Hotheads, and Hansen's Rough Riders. On the 6th of June, Alpha, Beta, and Gamma endured heavy air cover while landing on World. However, they were scattered and far from their objective. This gave the Lyran forces plenty of time to dig in and hold off the Dragoons. Delta and Epsilon were kept in reserve, but Jamie Wolf called them in as backup due to the fierce fighting. Delta did a drop behind enemy lines, but enemy aircraft ravaged their forces. They dealt some damage, but had to retreat and join up with the main Dragoon forces. Beta and Zeta were sent to be a distraction, while the Black Widows, alongside Delta and Epsilon, were attempting to flank the Defiance Industries factory complex via a mountain pass. Delta and Epsilon took on some enemy defenders as the Black Widows made it to the factory complex, but were beaten back by Hansen's Rough Riders. This was followed up by the arrival of reinforcements. The Lyran forces moved in for the kill, and the Dragoon attack force had to retreat. After weeks of fighting, the Dragoons had no choice but to abandon the world. After the retreat, the Dragoons took time to recover. Jamie Wolf went back to clan space and returned with new equipment 6 months later. There was little action during this time of recovery. At that time, Colonel Wise retired despite the protests of her team. Also, the team wasn't happy with her choice of successor, Major Kathleen Dumont. The Dragoons took up contract with the Lyran Commonwealth in 3020. The contract would be the first test for the new Delta commander. The Dragoons would be sent to Dromany to prevent a Kurita invasion. Alpha, Delta, and Epsilon were backed up by 3 regiments of the Dungal Guards as they attacked Dromany. They faced off with the 3rd and 22nd Dairon Regulars, but they had backup from the 2nd Sword of Light, adding an unexpected threat to the battle. Alpha faced off with the 22nd Dairon Regulars, and Delta was supposed to play defense. However, Delta moved forward and was ambushed by the Sword of Light. Instead of pulling back, they pushed forward and took heavy losses. The Dragoons were able to push back the Sword of Light, and the Kurita support forces were cut off by the Lyran forces. This attack caused major damage to the Combine plans, and a couple years later, the Lyrans would capture the world. Colonel Dumont would get reprimanded for her foolish actions, and would vow to do better. Due to issues with Lyran Command, Jamie Wolf used an escape clause in their contract to leave the Commonwealth in 3022. After that, they took up a contract with the Draconis Combine. Alpha, Gamma, and Delta went to Quinton as their first mission with House Kurita. Delta was sent out to harass the Davian forces and pull them away from the real target, the planet's industrial centers. The White Witches tried to break through their lines to support the rest of the Davian forces, but Able Battalion held the line and kept fighting. During the battle, Coordinator Takashi Karita and members of the Sword of Light joined the fight. This led to tension between the mercenaries and their client. Despite that, within a short time, the Dragoons claimed victory. This victory was a key factor in House Karita developing the Ryukin. The victory on Quinton would also restore confidence in Delta and their new colonel. As time passed, Delta would be involved in several raids into Davian territory and would occasionally play defense on the border. Despite their battle record, tensions grew between the DCMS and the Dragoons. This included Warlord Samsonov demanding that Colonel Dumont be replaced due to being a female commander. Once their contract was done, the Dragoons planned to leave the Draconis Combine with great haste. However, attacks by the DCMS forces pushed them into a battle on the World of Misery. The 5 Dragoon regiments, with their striker teams, would face off with 4 regiments of the Ryukin, 17th and 21st Gale Dawn Regulars, and the 8th Sword of Light. The battle was one of the most intense battles the Dragoons would ever face. Delta's Able Battalion destroyed a Ryukin battalion during the fighting. Baker Battalion went after a different team of Ryukin when they got attacked by the 17th Gale Dawn Regulars. They took on 3-2 odds, and while successful in driving off the Karita forces, they took heavy losses. Charlie Battalion was kept in reserve as a defense force due to the drinking problems that their commander, Major Neil Perella, was dealing with. This would be devastating to Charlie Battalion morale, and several company commanders would retire or move to other units after the Battle of Misery. While the battle was a victory, it came at a high cost, as nearly 50% of the Dragoon forces were wiped out. Delta was rebuilt into 4 provisional companies, and the remaining conventional forces were transferred to the Home Guard, the Dragoon Dependent Defense Team. Shortly before the declaration of the Fourth Succession War, the Dragoons took up a contract with the Federated Sons. Delta and Beta regiments guarded Wakapaneta. They fought the 3rd Proserpina Hussars and the 12th Gale Dawn Regulars. They chose to use guerrilla tactics to deal with enemy numbers. Beta's 3rd Provisional Company ended up destroying 25 Karita fighters while raiding an airfield. However, they were wiped out by the DCMS forces as they tried to return to their allies. The Delta's 2nd Provisional Company attempted to trap 2 lances of Karita forces, but caused a forest fire. Captain Ralph Cancade kept fighting even after ordering his men to retreat. 2 other mech warriors stood with him in this hopeless fight. Cancade died in his mech, but the battle destroyed several Karita units. Cancade's Thunderbolt remained as a memorial to represent his heroism. While guerrilla tactics kept the fight going, the Proserpina Hussars changed tactics and used smaller teams to hunt the Dragoons. Thus, the Dragoons would change their tactics as the battle shifted in favor of the aggressive Karita forces. Beta's 5th Company led the Hussars into an ambush, where nearly all Dragoon units attacked and used a minefield to destroy 12 Karita mechs. The Dragoons attempted to end the fight with information from the locals, so they hit the DCMS forces from behind, turning the tide of battle, driving the Karita soldiers away. However, Beta's 5th Company got hit hard, and Colonel Danielle Radmina and her crew got wiped out. The battle moved into city fighting, but bombardments left the city in rubble as the Dragoons hid from the attack. The Dragoons countered with assistance from local militia forces. This led to a defensive battle using the ruined city as cover. Colonel Dumont used underground tunnels to have the 3rd and 4th Companies strike at the Karita mechs whenever they could. By winter, supplies were low and the Dragoons made an escape from the city in the cover of a snowstorm. They made it to their dropships and escaped. Of the 9 companies they had arrived with, Beta and Delta only had 4 left in total. All the Dragoons regrouped on crossing. There was only a regiment worth of mechs still functional, and many of their mechs were in bad shape. In September 3029, the Karita forces came to crossing. 4 regiments of Gale Dawn Regulars arrived to fight the Dragoons. This included the 5th, 8th, 12th, and 16th, all of whom had faced the Dragoons in previous battles. To make matters worse, an elite team called the Sword of Void came to assist. Due to the sheer number of mechs they were fielding, the DCMS did not bring conventional forces to the fight. The Dragoons called up their conventional forces from the Home Guard that were stationed on Robinson. Despite a valiant defense, the numbers advantage of the Combine pushed the Dragoons to their breaking point. Things got desperate as the Dragoons faced overwhelming odds. During the battle, Colonel Dumont lost her mech. Things turned around when the 10th Deneb Light Cavalry hit the enemy forces from behind, giving the Dragoons some space to operate. Then, Zeta Battalion showed up with a fully rebuilt unit. Zeta worked with Alpha to take out the Sword of Void. This turned the tide of the battle, and the 5th Gale Dawn regulars were wiped out while retreating. The 16th surrendered to Natasha Kerensky. The 8th and 12th escaped after taking heavy damage. By the end of the Battle of Crossing, about a quarter of the Kurita forces were able to escape. After the war, the Dragoons had to take time to rebuild. It took until 3037 for Delta to be a functional regiment once again. They were rebuilt by training war orphans and bringing in true-born Dragoons via clan artificial breeding technology. A year later, Delta was sent to Murchison and faced off with the 22nd Dairon regulars. Sadly, Colonel Dumont would die in this battle, and the Dragoons were routed by the regulars. Despite not being at full strength, Delta joined the team of Wolf's Dragoons on Kaf in preparation for an invasion of Dairon. However, the Ryukin Ni and Ryukin San attacked Kaf. There was limited fighting as the Ryukin were attempting to disrupt enemy supply lines and delay the invasion. The Ryukin were able to deal damage to the 33rd Avalon Hussars and 3rd Crucius Lancers, which was enough to delay the invasion. Delta took heavy damage in the fighting as they were not at full strength. Still, they proved their valor on the battlefield. After the fighting ended, the Delta infantry would stumble across a 3-year-old in the ruins of a church. The girl would grow up as Stacy Church, who would be a key officer in the future, but has very little bearing on the history of Delta. Despite losses, Delta joined Alpha on a mission to Hisan in order to deal with the 3rd Free World's Guards. The Merrick forces had been dealing with civil unrest, and when they learned of the Dragoons' impending arrival, they retreated before the Dragoon forces could arrive, making this a bloodless victory. After the war, Delta returned to the Dragoon base on Outreach. Due to Delta's poor performance after the loss of Colonel Dumont, Colonel Wolf decided it was time for Delta to get new training. The remains of Delta trained alongside the Black Widow Battalion. By 3045, Delta was brought up to full strength and had the skill level that few could boast. When the clan invasion began, all Dragoon regiments returned to Outreach and would help train Inner Sphere leadership in the ways of the clans. When they were ready to counterattack, the Dragoons were ordered to defend Luthien by Hans Davian. Clan Novacat and Clan Smoke Jaguar were poised to attack the Kurita throne world. The Dragoons, alongside the Kellhounds, teamed up with some of the most elite soldiers the Draconis Combine had. Delta fought the 145th Jaguar Regulars in the Kadoguchi Valley. Delta destroyed the clan cluster. One of the Delta standouts was Shelly Brewbaker, who led a team that ambushed and defeated a Smoke Jaguar star. It was a struggle, but after days of heavy fighting, the Inner Sphere forces won. After the battle, the Dragoons were quick to rebuild by using clan salvage, receiving new units from their employers, and bringing on clan bondsmen to fill out their units. This would have unintended consequences, as a coup started in 3054 by Ilsen Novacat and Alpin Wolf would cause a major rift in the Dragoon ranks. Meanwhile, Delta and Zeta were on mission for the Federated Commonwealth. Zeta would break contract and return to Outreach to join Ilsen's coup forces. However, Delta remained on contract in order to maintain the unit's reputation. After Jamie Wolf's side won, the Dragoons started reorganizing. This included adding a team of elementals and aerofighters to Delta. Due to these changes, Major Shelly Brewbaker challenged Colonel Paxson to a trial of position. Brewbaker won and took command of Delta. Taxon then challenged to become her second in command. He was successful. Clan Jade Falcon began an invasion of the Lyran Alliance in 3058. Catherine Steiner-Davian's advisors decided that Coventry would be the goal of the Falcon advance. The Lyran defenses were not up to dealing with the Jade Falcons. Thus, mercenaries were brought in to assist. Delta and Gamma would team up with the 71st Light Horse Regiment of the Iridani Light Horse, the Waco Rangers, and the Crazy Eights. Gamma would function as backup to Delta's lead. However, the rivalry with the Waco Rangers made teamwork very difficult. The team arrived in April, and Colonel Brewbaker gave a bachal to the Falcons over the airfield they had captured. Star Colonel Creed Matlov of the 12th Falcon Regulars accepted. Delta's 1st Battalion stormed in and dealt damage to the spaceport and the Falcon defenses. When the main Falcon forces arrived, Colonel Brewbaker got into a battle with Star Captain Avra Rorschach, who used a Fire Falcon and nearly defeated Brewbaker's Night Star. So, Brewbaker called in backup, breaking the rules of the bachal. Thus, Matlov would call in backup as well and drive off the Dragoons. But the damage to the spaceport made it unusable for the Falcons. Once the main force was on world, they met up with local forces. This included the Coventry Militia, the Coventry Military Academy Cadre, and the 10th Sky Rangers. Local forces had been fighting a guerrilla war, which impressed Colonel Brewbaker. During this battle, a relationship would start between Brewbaker and Haptman Karadak Trevena, the acting 10th commander. A plan was set with the Dragoons and the Iridani Light Horse doing a two-pronged attack, with the rest of the forces flanking the enemy. The Falcons took out the Waco Rangers, and only a fraction of them were able to be rescued by Delta. The Lyran forces struggled to repel the Jade Falcon attacks over the course of weeks, and would get pinned down. In May, there was a large Aerofighter battle that drove off the Falcon bombers and prevented a major Jade Falcon push. Using underground tunnels, Delta and the 10th Sky Rangers hit the Falcon rear lines. They took several prisoners, supplies, and gained important intel. However, victory only came when Victor Steiner-Davian arrived with backup and offered Hijira to the Falcons. This was accepted, prisoners were exchanged, and the battle was over. Delta returned to Outreach in order to rebuild. They gained new armor forces and expanded infantry as well as aerospace. Delta built up to brigade status, 54% Omnimex, and the whole unit using top-of-the-line technology. They would take a contract to guard the Ghost Bear Draconis Combine border at Kisen. They would work with Gamma and Alpha, keeping the peace. In late 3067, a team of mercenaries working for the Word of Blake attacked Outreach. Many of the Dragoons stationed on Outreach were heavily damaged in the fighting. As a result, General Maeve Wolfe called in all the troops, but Delta held their post, as they had during the Dragoon Civil War. This would allow them to survive the early part of the Word of Blake War, mostly unscathed. In 3068, Delta was facing major criticism as public opinion turned against mercenaries. However, they kept their post and remained true to their word. They were moved to Buckminster in 3070 as defense in case the Word of Blake attacked the world again. Delta would soon face the 28th Division and 45th Shadow Division, as well as 2 warships. Delta lost their warship, and the last Karita warship was destroyed during the battle. Once the Blake forces landed, the real battle began. Delta took out 2/3 of the Blake forces, including killing the commander of the 45th. The Blake forces would retreat at great cost to both sides. Delta was mostly shattered as a unit, and would join the rest of the Dragoons on Ark Royal, where they were disbanded. It is theorized that the DCMS leadership orchestrated the Battle of Buckminster as a way of getting revenge on the Dragoons, which feels petty enough to actually be true. During the Dark Age, Delta remained a dead unit. Even though General Thomas Brewbaker considered rebuilding the unit, he never actually had the chance. Instead, he pushed for more striker teams, like the Tarantulas and the Wolfsbane, rather than rebuilding proper regiments. More than that, Brewbaker's stupid decisions would lead to the near destruction of the Wolf's Dragoons during the Ill Clan trial. Thankfully, after the madness of the Ill Clan trial, Colonel Henry Hack Cancade began a process of rebuilding the Dragoons. This included Delta Regiment. At the current time, Delta is battalion-sized and training for the difficulties that lie ahead. Delta really sets themselves apart as they avoid certain major battles because they choose to remain on contract rather than breaking it for personal reasons. Delta's bravery also led to several honor names that kept the history of Delta alive during the Dark Age. The rebirth of the unit in the Ill Clan era is a good sign of how the Wolf's Dragoons will recover in order to take revenge on Clan Wolf, as well as re-earn the reputation that was sullied while supporting Alaric Ward during the Ill Clan trial. Delta, like the rest of the Dragoons, had several notable mech warriors. Travis King, a Clan Wolf Freebirth warrior, a strict and by-the-book commander, he was killed in the Battle of New Oregon, becoming the first commanding officer of the Dragoons to die. He piloted an archer. Sarah, the Ghost, Wise, a Clan Freebirth that took over after Travis King died, a skilled tactician who developed successful hit-and-run maneuvers. After Hesperus, she retired and became an advisor. Later, she would help create the Home Guard. She piloted a fast heavy or medium mech. Kathleen Dumont took over as the commander in 3020. At first, she had difficulty leading the team, but improved over time. She had a good heart and was a skilled mech warrior. She died on Murchison in 3038. She piloted a Battlemaster. Bill Paxson. He took over when Dumont died, and was a moderately skilled leader. He put the reputation of the Dragoons above his beliefs, keeping the team on mission rather than joining the Dragoon Civil War. Even when he lost his position, he remained the second in command of Delta. He piloted an unlisted heavy mech. Shelly Brewbaker, a second-generation Dragoon who was a skilled member of the infantry. She earned her status as a commanding officer after defeating Bill Paxson in a trial of position. She was key in reorganizing the unit and keeping them together until they were disbanded in the 3070s. She piloted a custom Night Star upgraded with clan tech. Ralph Cancade, a company commander in Baker during the Battle of Misery, where his wife and son died under his command. He was promoted to the leader of Delta's 2nd Provisional Company and fought on Wakapaneta, where he made a brave last stand that allowed his troops to withdraw. He piloted a Thunderbolt. Carl Wise, the son of Sarah Wise, who tried to set himself apart from his legacy. He was a serious-minded tank commander who would eventually become part of the Home Guard rather than earning a mech warrior position. He piloted a Manticore heavy tank. Neil Perella, an original Dragoon who fought with Delta and became the Charlie Battalion commander. He was known for his drinking, which got worse over time. He rose in ranks and got transferred to Gamma after the Fourth Succession War, and took command of Gamma after the Battle of Luthien. He joined the rebellion against Wolf in 3054 and would go missing by the end of the conflict. He piloted a Marauder, later an Imp, and then a Timberwolf, Mad Cat, at the end of his career. Delta has mechs of every weight and style in order to fill out their ranks. However, the mechs used changed based on the tactics employed by the leadership of the unit. Colonel King was methodical and by the book, with standard loadouts. Colonel Wise was skilled at hit-and-run maneuvers, thus focusing on faster units. Colonel Dumont specialized her forces, with Alpha running heavier mechs, Baker using speed, and Charlie using heavy armor for defense. Finally, Brewbaker used wave attacks and combined arms, going full circle. It took time for them to expand their armor forces, as they tended to sacrifice armor in order to have more Aerofighter support until the Civil War era. Delta used standard formations, but they shifted into a clan intersphere hybrid style later on. The command company was made up of a command lance, 2 mech stars, 1 aerospace point, 1 elemental point, and a recon team made up of a fast mech and 5 support vehicles. Delta Command was usually a close combat-based unit. The battalions were made up of a command lance with 3 companies of mechs. Abel was nicknamed the Lanchknechts, Baker was called the Spectres, and later be called Vancini's Vanguards. Charlie was called Fanlax. Devil Battalion was known as the 75th Dragoon Heavy Armor, and made up of 4 armor battalions. Eagle Battalion was Delta Elemental Support, made up of a command point and 3 elemental stars. Foxtrot Battalion was Delta Air Support, also known as Redding's Air Rangers, and made up of 3 wings. Their infantry was called Winter's Storm Wolves, which was a mixed regiment of battle armor, jump, and mechanized infantry. Delta Regiment has a fun mix of speed and power, backed up by a great variety of support forces, complete with enough jump and dropships to get them where they needed to go. Like the rest of the Wolf's Dragoons, they are a powerful force that only falls when the odds are truly stacked against them. There are fewer fiction entries featuring Delta than other regiments, but they do appear in the Battle of Coventry related stories. Beyond that, there are several source books and mission books that feature Delta. They even have a brief reference in a couple technical readouts. Bear in mind that some source books only have location or composition data. Last time I said I wasn't sure what to expect with Delta Regiment. Honestly, I was a little surprised with the interesting turns in their history, making this video a bit more fun than Gamma. However, my hopes are not as high for Epsilon, as they seem to be Gamma 2.0, with limited unique history. Hopefully, I will be wrong, and the next video will be fun to make as well. I am tempted to make a team of Delta Dragoons, as the story of the unit gives them plenty of fun battles to fight. As I did my research, it dawned on me that Delta feels like it is designed for larger engagements, making them perfect for Alpha Strike or large combined arms games. If only there was a rule set for combat support. On an unrelated note, check out my unboxing video on the BattleTech Mercenaries Kickstarter. My next video will be on Epsilon Regiment, and soon I will be covering Zeta and the Spiders. Then it will be on to smaller mercenary forces once again. Thank you for watching, and thank you to all the new subscribers. May your weapons stay hot, and your reactors stay cool. Look forward to the next video, and until then, I'll see you at the tavern.